Hello, Tania. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's so great to be back.
After, was it 4 years, you said?
4 years, yes, a little more than 4
Wow.
years.
That is, as we were saying, a lot's happened in that time, my goodness. And we've just had a very long conversation before we've even started recording, because we started to talk about kind of, so what has happened? What have you seen? What can we talk about as a part two since we had that conversation? And that's just taken us all this time to talk about. It's like we must stop and actually press record. But I actually feel that would make a really good conversation to begin the show. Why are we here having this part two about what seems to appear like to be the same topic? And, the topic we spoke about last time, I believe particularly was focused around peri-menopause, which is, a timeless topic. And yet we're here having this conversation now. Why?
Yes. So our bodies are still brilliant, as I explained in the first episode that we did together. And perimenopause and menopause are not a time of deficiency or disease. They are a natural part of our life cycle. Women have always gone through those parts of the life cycle, and symptoms are optional. And our body still communicates with us through feelings and symptoms. And I explain a lot of that in the first episode. But things have really changed since we last spoke, particularly in the UK. And it seems that women's understanding of menopause has changed and women's behavior has changed. And that's because something has gone on in the UK to promote much more aggressively than before, and then in any other part of the world, apart from perhaps Ireland, a medical approach to menopause. And much more than I had seen ever before. The media, the general discourse around menopause has become much more focused on HRT, much more focused on convincing women that they're in some kind of deficiency state, even disease state. And like I said, nothing has changed about menopause itself, but the discussion around it has radically changed, specifically in the UK and Ireland.
So I'm so glad that you're bringing this, because it's something I think, whether you're someone like me who, I haven't consumed the news for decades now, like really decades. And so I tend to not know what's going on in terms of from a media perspective. So whether you're someone like me that just has no clue about those things, or whether you're someone who is actively consuming the media, it can be a bit like that cliche of the sort of frog in boiling water, that if that's happening at this kind of very gradual level, it can actually be hard to discern that something has changed. So I think this is a really important thing to begin this conversation with. So again, we don't want to spend the entire conversation, and I know that you really don't want to kind of name and shame people, but would you give a bit of a sense as to why you think that's happening, why there's been this shift?
Yeah. So if we look at the history of the medicalisation of menopause, which I think it's important to do because we see these trends come back over and over again. So really, it started booming in the 1960s in the US. And there was a book that came out called Feminine Forever that was very influential by a New York-based gynecologist. And basically in the book, he described menopause as a hormone deficiency disease. He suggested that a wonder pill, which back then was just estrogen therapy, could solve, up to 30 symptoms of menopause and could prevent women from getting all kinds of disease, heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, etc. And really offered
Clever title. Clever title of the book.
And one of the things it could help women with was stay attractive in their tennis dress. Actually, that's what he said. Yes. And the most important point. And so it became sort of like a big hit, and up to 50% of women in the US were taking estrogen therapy. And then with time, research was actually done.
What did you just say then? Up to
50% of women.
50% of women of
of menopausal age Yes, were taking estrogen therapy for a long time, for decades.
Goodness.
And that was in the US, not in the UK. And because it became to be seen as, the preventer of all disease and the solver of women's problems in menopause. And then research was actually done, which wasn't carried out before this big promotion. And it wasn't carried out before any of these claims were made. They were just made up. And research was done, and it was found that estrogen alone caused an increase in cancer in the uterus. And so then, without doing any research, progesterone was added, and that was pushed out to women. And then research was done, and it was found to be problematic as well. And then, so that was sort of like the turn of this century. That a big research called the Women's Health Initiative came out, and really the pharmaceutical industry around HRT was sort of like taken back, didn't know what to do. And they've been clamoring for a way, to try and repackage HRT for women. But the more the science was carried out, the trend was to say that HRT can actually be helpful in fewer and fewer symptoms. And in 2017, a very big research was published. That was 18-year research comparing mortality rates of women who had taken HRT and taken a placebo, and found no difference in the mortality rates, which, for women on HRT, they can say, okay, that's, very comforting. But it also meant that this whole idea that it could prevent disease, prevent early mortality was totally made up. And so the North American Menopause Society changed their policy statement on HRT in 2017 in the light of this research. And HRT was recommended only for hot flushes and night sweats, vaginal dryness and some urinary problems, and osteoporosis. And there's an asterisk next to osteoporosis, because if you take HRT for an average of 7 years at midlife, you cannot prevent a case of osteoporosis further down the line, because there is a change in bone density that happens by taking estrogen. But as soon as you stop, it stops. It reverses to where you were. So the idea that it prevents osteoporosis further down the line, which is if women experience it, would be when women would experience it, is also made up. And when you read the small print, it actually says that, but you have to read the small print and not just the headlines. And at that time,
check something with you. So typically, is HRT only prescribed for a kind of window of time as women are in that transition, or do most continue to take it?
Right. Well, it used to be offered to women for decades. And then when research was done, they found that the further away you get from menopause, the risks increase. And so they settled on a sort of like average of 7 years. And women need to be tested. And it's not an easy drug to prescribe. Many women, they get a prescription for HRT. It doesn't work well, or it gives them side effects, and then they try a different combination, and then maybe they get side effects again. And I've spoken to women who've tried sort of 4 different types of HRT and have just given up because they just couldn't find one that worked well for them without side effects. So doctors know this, by the way. And so when you're thinking of a doctor prescribing a drug that they know the woman has to keep coming back and changing it, and they also need to keep on being tested, doctors are less likely to be enthusiastic about prescribing that drug. But anyway, what happened in 2017 was the North American Menopause Society came out with this new policy. Most of the world adopted the policy. UK, the British Menopause Society, did not endorse this new policy statement. And so in the UK, under the NICE guidelines, you still have HRT, suggested that it could help with depression, that it could prevent heart disease, and some other diseases. And so the UK at that time went out on a limb and was telling women a very different story than the rest of the world.
Was there an actual like conscious and expressed reason that they rejected that research?
No one that I've spoken to really knows why that happened. But within a few years, the discourse in the UK went quite unrecognizable. And lots of media time are given to different, let's call them menopause celebrities, talking about menopause in a very different way than what we had seen in the UK in previous decades. And so this idea that menopause is basically what's happened is this book that I told you about, Feminine Forever, with the tennis dress, all of those ideas have sort of been modernized and are now being pushed out to women in the UK. So menopause is seen as a hormone deficiency and sometimes even a disease. Sometimes it's even called sort of a disease state. Menopause, HRT is being pushed out to help women with depression and even to supposedly prevent suicide and to prevent all kinds of future disease, suggestions of that it prevents cancer, prevents heart disease, prevents diabetes, prevents dementia, and of course is the absolute wonder drug that women need for any kind of symptom that they experience at midlife. And again, the science isn't there to back most of these statements up, apart from what I've said, the North American Menopause Society now states in their position statement. So women are now being encouraged to fear their bodies at midlife and moving on in a much greater way than they were fearing their bodies before. And this changes, surprise, surprise, women's experience of menopause. And so women come into, there's more awareness now of perimenopause. And we talked about that, 4 years ago, but now there is more awareness about perimenopause. But women
that's in itself is an interesting thing. Sorry to interrupt you, but what you're saying there, I think is really important. There is, and I think this has been shown across so many other issues, topics, let's say, whereas there's this really interesting kind of like rise in awareness of something, but it all simultaneously is creating the very thing that is raising the awareness of in not necessarily what we could say a positive way. I've seen various research suggesting that with all different other topics. And so I find that interesting with perimenopause, where it's like, it's really helpful to speak about things that women are experiencing, but I've noticed how increasingly it seems as though there's this like increasingly extreme negative experience of perimenopause that just didn't seem to be the case, however many years ago.
Yes.
So I just wanted to mention that, whether you've noticed that yourself, given it's such a focus of your work.
Yes, so absolutely. And what's so interesting is as they've expanded the number of symptoms that perimenopause and menopause are now associated with, more women seem to be experiencing the symptoms that are listed there, and everything is now, chucked into that one container of, oh, it must be my hormones. And my approach is, well, your hormones are divinely managed. And whatever we think, that we can come in and manage our endocrine system, just like your heart is divinely, pumped, or however you want to call it, so are your hormones. And we cannot detach our hormones from the divine essence that we are. But we like to, because we've been told to, package these things up and think that they're going crazy. So, when that's the narrative around hormones, these crazy things that just go wild and you can't control them, and we need to control them, and you need to fix them if you want to feel better, then you can chuck everything at it. And that's what's been done. And just interesting, I was listening to a professor of gynecology, and she was saying that, for example, cognitive function is something that women are complaining about more and more. Now, is it because more women are aware? And so more women are like, oh my God, I can't, I've got brain fog, I can't remember anything, and it must be perimenopause, it must be menopause. Is it because as a society, we have huge mental load that's unprecedented in history? And so, of course, at a sensitive time, which is perimenopause and menopause, when the body is actually sending us signals to slow down and we're misinterpreting them as a malfunction, could that be causing the brain fog? And it's a sign from the body, oh, perhaps you want to unload the mental load and perhaps you want to slow down. Or is it just something that, was always there and we just didn't, pay any attention to it?
Into
So
the spotlight was put. Can I just add something that's so actually there's two things that really occurring to me at the moment. One is I haven't experienced kind of anything that I think falls under the perimenopause or sort of bracket thus far. So I'm only speaking from a place of kind of still having a menstrual cycle and kind of like really spending now many years becoming really intimate with that, really honoring the menstrual cycle. And I very much have seen that women who have reclaimed that relationship with their menstrual cycle, which of course, is that fluctuation of hormones, that we can either approach from that controlling perspective or we can approach from this, again, this real honoring, this reverence of the just divine order that is there and we're experiencing through our bodies. My sense is that the more that we've almost had the training wheels of our menstrual cycle and understanding all of this, the more we're then going to be able to bring that awareness to perimenopause and menopause. But the fact is, culturally, we're missing that, aren't we? We really aren't even in the menstrual cycle phase recognizing the beauty of it. We medicalize and see as a problem that we need to control even when we're menstruating. So no wonder we then take that whole mindset into perimenopause and beyond.
yeah, absolutely spot on. And the number one thing I encourage women to do is to create a new relationship with their body. If women are interested in healing their symptoms naturally, that relationship of love, respect, compassion, and understanding is so core to experiencing healing. Because once we see that everything is part of the divine, symptoms are not beyond the divine, hormones are not beyond the divine, then like we can't sort of like express that it must be my hormones going crazy. We look more at ourselves as this holistic divine expression and wonder what could be out of balance that could be causing, just like in our menstrual years, severe PMS, etc., can also be causing symptoms at midlife. And it's a wonderful thing that menstrual awareness is sort of like on the rise, and that perhaps that would be dream, a real dream, that more women come into midlife rather than crashing into it, rather than years sort of like trying to manage their PMS or other symptoms using the pill or other forms of medication, that they come into it with respect, and the journey will be so much smoother, like 100%.
It can't not be. I just can't see. I mean, I've gone from having a relationship to my menstrual cycle, which was, at best functional, but at some points it was so painful. I've had very heavy, very painful bleeds, excruciating PMS. And now I can genuinely say, like, I absolutely love my menstrual cycle. Like, it is a true love affair. True love affair. And I think, well, how could that, going from that kind of relationship to one of love, how could that not change how we enter menopause? Like, it has to, surely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all about, even the simplest things I often mention. For example, when we come closer to our period and we experience this change, we're feeling different, we're feeling exhausted. Taking the message of, I'm feeling tired, I'm going to crawl into my bed, I'm going to nourish myself, I'm going to rest, as opposed to, okay, what pill can I take to fight through this and, get through?
And just carry on. Yeah.
It makes such a difference. And it's such a respect of, oh, I guess I've been working really hard. I guess I've been really stressed through the month. Here comes the message to tell me to slow down. I will embrace that wisdom and I will relax into it. And then I have a different experience of my menstrual cycle. And as you move on, you have a different experience of perimenopause and menopause, just with that loving respect, that appreciation of the wisdom. That's such an amazing guidance for our health and well-being.
Absolutely. The other thing that was occurring to me, and actually something you said just now really aligned to it. At the moment, I've been autistically obsessing around the idea of biological diversity, more from a perspective of, you know, nature, the wild, that kind of like natural balance of all the things. And as we've been talking, I've been looking at that lens of biodiversity from both a body perspective, as in the diversity of all the changing cycles, all the changing parts, but then also the biodiversity of women who have moved into menopause and become the wise women, and the biodiversity of them within their families and communities. Um, and how all of this is part of a divine order that we cannot conceive of with our human minds. We cannot, like, just like we can't, when at the moment I'm looking at it again from the lens of, you know, our gardens and the natural world and how we can be part of that, bringing back that biodiversity. But we're we just, it's so beyond us to really understand the beauty of how this is all taking place within our bodies, again, let alone the part that then plays within our culture.
Yes.
It's the more I look at it, the more awe-inspiring that is, isn't it? Really, it's just like, it's so perfectly designed. We don't have a chance of understanding it well enough to then be able to kind of fix and medicalize and control parts of it.
Yeah. And luckily we don't. Like, we don't need to go into that micromanagement of our life cycle because we're taken care of. And what we can do through appreciation is, for example, view the menopause change as a rite of passage. The rite of passage to an elder. Well, it's going to be a sensitive time once we see it through that lens, and we can appreciate it through that lens. And it's not supposed to be a walk in the park, because if it was a walk in the park and a picnic, like, you wouldn't change, right? And
it wouldn't be an initiation and a rite of passage.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But society requires us to have some soul searching, to have a shift in consciousness, to go through that rite of passage so we come out a different woman that not only benefits us as we age, but benefits everyone around us as we move into the wiser elder position in society. The whole of this push, again, to medicalize menopause seems to be an attempt to, well, it's profit driven and it's a business plan, right? That's one thing. But it's erasing that rite of passage. It's erasing the move into becoming the wiser elder. It's preventing women from changing, evolving, transforming, because we're desensitizing the body. That's what the medicalization of menopause does. It desensitizes the process, desensitizes the body, and we don't come out, you know, the way we're supposed to. We come out a medicalized version of our former self.
Wow. Hearing that has just landed with me at a whole nother level of depth. I was thinking, imagine our response if we medicalized girls so that they didn't, you know, it's like, oh, it'd be so much nicer if they didn't have to have a menstrual cycle, just so much easier for them and for their families. Let's stop them having a menstrual cycle. But we're doing the equivalent other end by stopping women having that natural move into that next phase. That it's just hit me how profound that is.
And unfortunately, you know, I'm reading more and more stories of women who were put on the pill in their early teenage years because of painful periods, because of misunderstanding of where that can come from. Put on the pill led to was in the creation with other things, right? That led to mental health problems down the line, led to other issues that often, I'm not saying this happens to every woman that started the pill when she was a young teenager, but I've seen so many stories. Then she has to, like, she's convinced to have a hysterectomy. Then she has a terrible menopause experience. It's a surgical menopause experience, very different. And then she's fighting all the time with the medical system about, you know, what medicine should be taking, what hormones she should be taking, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's so clear that when you read these stories and you go back to the root and you go, oh my goodness, that poor adolescent girl wasn't served when she needed to be served at that tender, sensitive time. And that's just created this history of challenges that I'm not saying she can't heal from it, but it's so unnecessary. And it's all from this idea, let's medicalize the menstrual cycle, the life cycle, and let's rely on medicine just to solve, you know, a problem, which the cause for the problem lies somewhere else.
Yes, you're so right. So right. Yes, the interesting thing is I said, like, imagine if we did this, but to a large extent, we do literally do that. Whew, okay. It feels like we've got so many different places to take this. I know that I interrupted you earlier. Was there a thread that you wanted to continue on?
Yeah, I think we were just talking about like the general increase in fear that's been created in the UK unnecessarily, but it's changing women's relationship to their bodies. And it's not helpful. It's just not helpful. To believe that we need a medical solution at midlife to prevent a disease further down the line is made up. And yet women are being convinced that they're doing something good for their health by medicalising midlife. And not only, like we've just said, it seems to neutralise this rite of passage. You know, it can lead to further complications down the line because all medicines involve risks. So why the UK is in this trial, why UK women are being experimented on in this way with so much fear and with such a push of the medicalized route, I don't really know. But I think it's important for women to know that that is what's happening. And we're seeing in other parts of the world, a little bit in the UK, a little bit in the US, a little bit in Australia, like these movements to sort of like follow the direction of what's happening in the UK. And I think it's been really useful for women to stand up and say, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And what happens if we have a different relationship with our body? What happens if we respect this time of change, sensitive as it is, you know, along with the challenges that it can create? What happens if we change our experience of it? And that's totally possible. Yeah.
I really I'd like to take the conversation in a slightly different direction in a moment. But going back to what we were saying about rites of passage, in my own journey on the shamanic path, and very intentionally entering extremely challenging initiations at times, I so see now that it's kind of like whatever it is, you know, whatever we're growing to, that you know, whether it be wiser, whether it be more powerful, whether it might be more open, whatever the thing is, it only comes through going through that initiation, which is very rarely easy. And this has just suddenly hit me so deeply that when we're making that part that's not easy, you know, like, that's wrong. It should, you know, not to say therefore it has to be, you know, going through menopause has to be excruciatingly hard, but it's like when we're making wrong the fact that it is an initiation, it is a rite of passage, it is a deep transformation, we're then making wrong everything that's different to what was. And it's like we can only move into what's new by going through that rite of passage, that portal. There's something so important there, which again, I think just culturally, because we're so wired to have everything be managed, be comfortable, be the same. We're just not able to cope with the idea that things are changing, are different to what we've known. So it creates this whole basis where it makes sense to medicalize it because we're so scared of things being different to what was.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to say that every woman through this time is going to have her own path, and she's going to make her own decisions. And women often ask me about different medications. I'm not a medical professional. I don't, that's not my gig. It also supplements, herbs, etc. That's not my speciality. I just know that there is a path that you can walk through this sensitive, transformative period in life naturally and with far fewer symptoms, and you'll come out a changed woman as per the design. Now, for some women, they may get to a stage where they're like, this is, I can't cope with the night sweats, I'm not sleeping properly, the hot flushes, the et cetera, et cetera. And she may then take the decision to take HRT. And that's absolutely fine. If she, comes to that decision in a sovereign way without the media telling her, fear your body, fear the disease, fear that, if that's what she comes to in her decision, that's her path. I then say, we can look at HRT like first aid, because it can turn down the volume of symptoms. That sometimes it gets us into a place where we can see something new that we haven't seen before. It's not necessary, but it's one of the options that women can take. So the idea is not that we suffer through midlife. Oh, and then we can get onto the like, oh, you're just a woman, you just need to suffer. Like, that's not the idea. But the idea is we can experience this sensitive time very differently. And we can reach out to, whether it be synthetic or herbal or anything, to help us along the way. But if we don't, I don't want to even say do the work. I wish there was another way to describe it, because it's not really work. But if we don't look within, if we don't learn something about what is going on, where health lies, we're going to come to the point where perhaps we have to come off that support, medical, herbal support, and we're going to be back to square one. Because the body is designed to teach us at this time, and we are supposed to grow. And that's exactly what the body wants. So it's going to find the way to tell us, it's not going to be through email, it's not going to be through WhatsApp, it's going to be through a symptom or a feeling. And so we can either deal with it now, or we will deal with it down the line. It's sort of, it's inevitable.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm just going to say this, then I'm going to ask you the question that that takes us to the other place that we wanted to go. I think, again, this is where our menstrual cycle before menopause can really teach us that. Again, we talked earlier about PMS, PMT, where I know so deeply now that whatever's coming up, particularly in that time, which I'd refer to as the wild woman time, where we are really sensitive, that teaches me so much about changes I need to make in my life. So much. There's nothing wrong in here. It's about the way that I'm, living, that is really then at that point I'm so alert to, so aware of. But if I was trying to dismiss, the extreme sensitivity that I'm feeling at that time, I wouldn't be learning what I need to change in my life. And it feels to me that the perimenopause is a kind of extended period of sensitivity that's saying, this needs to be changed. This way of living, this relationship, this way of working, whatever the thing is. Okay, right. On to the other part of the conversation that I'd love to be able to have before we close. I know that you've experienced some real pushback and difficulties as you've been expressing some of these things. And as we were talking about, I think it's so important that these kind of ideas have a voice. And, for each of us, we're going to have our own journey with that in itself. But I think it's something that's so helpful to talk about, that by sharing ideas of this nature, we may well get some kind of experience that comes back that isn't desirable. But that also is something that I guess is, part of this entire it's all part of it, isn't it? Like the conversations aren't separate to what's happening. And so I'd love to, I know there was something you wanted to share with me in terms of a particular story. So that's where I'd love to go now.
Yeah. So yes, in my work, as I come and share a message of the body as brilliant, of natural healing being possible, it seems to many women that I am pulling the rug from under their feet, because they've held on to a story that it's their hormones. So even though their hormones are inside them, they are able to package it and say, oh no, that's not something that I can control. That's my crazy hormones. And thus I need an external force to come in and control them. And I'm coming with the message of, well, what's going on with our lives? What happens if we look within? What happens if we have a new understanding of the body? And it can feel very disorientating. And so I understand why some women then really lash out, and they're at the sensitive time, right? So if you want to be sharing a message that's seen as controversial, then among menopausal women, it has a certain resonance when it hits. Right. But the thing is that I have seen, when this first started to happen, I was, shocked by what could that mean, especially because when I first started sharing, which was in 2015, after I had healed my symptoms through insight alone. And if people want to hear more about that, it's in the previous episode. Then, I started sharing timidly because I was very aware that people say, well, you're not a doctor, you're not a psychologist. Well, like, what do you like, what's your expertise? And I'm like, well, I've had this experience and I think it's quite significant and I'd like to share it. And with time, I could see how helpful it was for other women and how other women were having a similar experience. But still, people would come at me and say, but you're not a doctor and you're there, and it could shake me up. With time, I saw, well, actually, it can't be about what I'm sharing, because there are women who are having a loving experience of what I'm sharing, and there are women who are having a very fearful and aggressive experience of what I'm sharing. So it's actually not what I'm sharing. I'm shining light in a way, and people are having a different experience. And I'm sure there are women who have a completely neutral experience of what I'm saying, and they're just like getting on with their lives and they don't really care. But even, just yesterday, I was on Twitter and getting some really angry feedback from someone who was completely taking my work into her personal experience of whatever she was going on and, making all kinds of accusations at me. But with the years that have gone by, I've realized it's not about my work. So I can have a different experience of whatever is coming, being thrown at me, whether it's love or the opposite, right? And that's up to me to manage that. And so I think that's very useful to share with women. And in particular, like over the last few years, that I've remained outspoken about many things that people have found controversial, and I've had so much crap thrown at me. I'm so grateful that I've had this understanding that I can see, oh yeah, it's not about what I'm sharing, it's about what people's thinking about what I'm sharing. But another experience of mine came to mind, and I think this is the perfect podcast to share. In my early 20s, I moved to Paris for almost a year, and I was teaching English after my degree, and I just moved there. And I was walking home one evening from work, and it was dark and it was winter, and I thought, that looks like a shortcut back to my flat that I was renting out. And I took the shortcut, and it was like a little alley, not very wise. And I realized, oh, this goes nowhere. This isn't a shortcut. I was coming back up the alley, and suddenly two young men were in front of me. And this is not true. This shouldn't be a trigger. So like, they just basically, they mugged me. They took my bag, and they ran down the alley. And I had in my bag, it was sort of a briefcase bag because I was teaching, and I had like my passport and my keys and all kinds of things. I'd been at the bank that day. And I remember very clearly something that happened, that there was sort of an explosion within, which I understand is the fight or flight. And at the same time, I thought, oh, beep, right? All my stuff is in there. And I thought, how dare they? And I didn't think twice. I turned around and I ran down after these two guys down the alley to get my bag. And they came to the end of the alley and they turned around and were to face me. And I was throwing at them my best English because I didn't have the French of that level that perhaps we'd use in a playground once. And then I became conscious of two things that were going on. And on one level, I became conscious that I was, saying all these things. And on the other level, I felt my hair turn into snakes. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. I'm becoming Medusa. And very quickly, they threw the bag at my feet and ran back up the alley and ran away. And I turned around, I was like, arrest them, someone sort of stopped, but then I guess they knew them and they got away. Well, after that experience, I was renting a flat with two Brazilian flatmates, and they were like, are you absolutely crazy? Do you know what happens to you in Brazil if you attack a mugger? Do you know that you can be, stabbed? I was like, well, I didn't really think about it. And it all became a thing of like, was I stupid? Was I not stupid? And the whole Medusa thing completely wiped from my memory. A year later, I was actually in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City, traveling with a friend who I'd met in France. And we were also in the evening, walking around. And she had all her valuables for some reason in a pouch that she kept on her shoulder. And I saw a young man come and grab her pouch and run off with it. And I didn't think twice, ran after him, tackled him, brought him down to the ground. He managed to jump up and run away. And as I come up, I hear my friend calling me, Tania, qu'est-ce que tu fais? Like, what are you doing? I'm like, he's just taken your pouch. All your valuables were in your pouch. She's like, no, he didn't take my pouch. He grabbed my breast. So we were in hysterics for hours afterwards. And I'm sure that guy wasn't going to grope a woman for a long time. But the point of the story is, and I only realized this, just in recent years, the Medusa story came back to me. I have Medusa in my pocket. And as an archetype, you need to be careful of that archetype because, it can be very destructive. But it also is an enabler of being able to speak your truth and being able to speak out where you see injustice. And my path over the last few years has been very much about sharing what I see as truth against an injustice. And I know that different women, different men, they have different archetypes, right, within. And so if there was a crisis, for example, I would not be the woman who makes soup. I can make soup, right? I can make soup. I would not be the woman who organizes, blankets but if you need me to get up in front of an angry crowd of thousands of people, I have no problem doing that. And so over the last, few years when I've been getting a lot of pushback, and I still get it until today. So number one, I have the understanding that it's not what I say. But number two, when I feel like, wow, I just don't understand why so many people aren't speaking up who I would imagine might speak up. I know that I have Medusa in my pocket. I don't need to get her out. But just knowing that she's there is comforting enough for me and helps me keep going forward, no matter what, because I have that strength within me. And not everyone will feel comfortable in that position, but I can feel assured that I can feel comfortable in that position because I have, as I said, Medusa in my pocket.
Oh my goodness, Tania, I love that. So I've had just chills constantly as you've shared that. Wow. I I honor the Medusa that's in your pocket.
I also I feel very emotional like sharing that story, because it's just not something like I've shared it once on a webinar that I co-hosted, and it was quite small, because I guess it's not something you really want to tell people that you became Medusa. But and I like I said, I completely wiped it out of my awareness. But these last few years have brought that memory back, and I think for good reason. And it's really a call for everyone to find and understand what their strengths are and feel comfortable in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was feeling a little bit speechless after you finished sharing that, but as I'm sort of coming back to myself, I just I couldn't agree more. As you know, so much of the work that we do at Wake in the Wild is archetypal in nature. And what I've seen over and over again, when we find those archetypes that are right for us, and again, we don't all have the same archetypes, but when they find us or we find them, they can be empowering and liberating beyond anything I think that humans can really make sense of. But I've heard and seen so many examples of that now that I trust that. I trust that. So thank you so much for sharing that story. What a perfect end to the show. Absolutely wonderful. So if listeners would like to find out more about you and all the incredible work you do, where can they find out?
Yes. So the easiest way is to go to my website, which is thewiserwoman.com. And I do like to say, the wiser woman, she's not me. Is that okay? Can you hear me right? Yeah.
Yes,
okay. I just pressed something on my microphone.
Oh.
The wiser woman, she's not me. She is in every single woman, and she bubbles to the surface at this time and wants to come out. So, I offer women lots of resources to help them on this journey. And I have a book that came out a few months ago, The Wiser Woman's Guide to Perimenopause and Menopause.
Which I have right
You
here.
Okay. And that is a short and hopefully inspiring read that talks a lot about the natural journey that we can take and the empowering journey that we can take through perimenopause and menopause. And I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, and you can show up in any way, but it's always nice if you show up in an appreciative way. But even if you have to throw something at me, like verbally, it's fine, because I have the skills to cope. And yes, and the archetype that, protects me. So it's, I'm always happy to answer questions. And I offer one-on-one coaching and online course. And all of that is designed to really help women transform their experience of midlife change, because it's an amazing journey. It's a fascinating journey. And we are supposed to tap into the wiser woman within and let her blossom and flourish.
Oh, gorgeous. Thank you so much, Tania. This has been just a glorious conversation. Thank you so much and also just for the work that you do. Really, I'm speaking now on behalf of all women. What you're doing is so needed. So needed. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you too. And I love this podcast, so I'm happy to be back on it.
Thank you.